Good morning. I'm David Breeden. I'm the Senior Minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, and this is Coffee and Wisdom when we look at humanism, past, present, and where it might be going, and also some streams within American popular culture that have affected the way that the average American thinks, but also the free thinkers among us. This week, we've been looking at an article from the Oxford Handbook of Humanism, titled "What Does It Mean to Practice Humanism" by Dr. James Croft, who is the ethical culture leader in St. Louis, Missouri. He lists 6 commitments that really focus what humanists think and do. And he does focus on the idea of practice, which I've been doing this week with some of the free thinkers who have really changed things, but have been a little bit edgy, either out front or a little bit difficult to get along with in the wider culture. He talks about the humanist commitments as these. One is the epistemic commitment. That is how humanists think we can find the best path toward knowledge and facts. Second is the naturalist commitment, which is a belief in the science and reason. And 3, the ethical commitment, that is what we commit to, usually based on history, sociology, evolution, and our understanding of human psychology, to be ethics and ethical. And one of the things we've noticed about that is that free thinkers and humanists tend to be out front of the ethical thinking of the wider culture. The 4th is self-actualization commitment. That is that we believe that we should be getting better and more broad-minded and be willing to change our minds all the time. 5, the social commitment. That is that we live in community with other people, talking and working with conversation to try to better understand the human condition and each other. And 6, the justice commitment, the wider social commitment to social justice. Those 6, argue Dr. Croft, are the humanist commitments, and I think that's a pretty darn good list, actually. The person I want to talk about today is Matilda Joslyn Gage, 1826-1898. The latest biography of her is called Born Criminal. Matilda Joslyn Gage, Radical Suffragist, by Angelica Shirley Carpenter. A very fascinating human being, not much known in the wider culture, but a very important free thinker into the humanist understanding of our commitments in the world. She was a writer, an editor, an abolitionist before the war, Underground Railroad participant when that was very dangerous and illegal, a suffragette, and a native rights advocate, something very ahead of her time when she was alive. One of her famous quotes is, "It is sometimes better to be a dead man than a live woman." And so you can see where she's going with her ideas of feminism. This little black and white photo is not actually her. It's a reenactment of a scene that then made it into the newspapers of cops coming to arrest her for making a speech without a license. And she talked them out of it and didn't go to jail for that. So kind of a famous suffragette moment in the 19th century. There was a lot of talk when we were talking about the 100th anniversary of the women's suffrage in the United States about the fact that the women's movement abandoned other social justice commitments. Women of color were not involved in the wider movement. The reason for that is that the radicals of the feminist movement were purged by the centrists and the more conservatives in order to make the movement more palatable to more people, more voters, more men, in other words, in the United States. She sided with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the radical wing of the women's movement. And one of their points was that Christianity was the enemy of women's rights. And you can see how that was probably not so popular in the mid to late 19th century. The more centrist people decided that these radicals, these former abolitionists, were just too much, and that they could not become they could not be the public spokesman for women's suffrage. suffrage. So that's how that happened, is that the more humanist freethinkers were shunted to the side and kicked out. This is a picture of the more radical people, and in it you see, this is Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and there we see right by her side Ms. Gage. She also said this: the careful student of history will discover that Christianity has been of very little value in advancing civilization, but has done a great deal toward retarding it. You can see why that was considered very radical for the time. It's not something we see a lot in American popular writing today. She's famous for writing a book called Woman, Church, and State, published in 1893 and still in print. This is a more contemporary cover for that book. It really is a groundbreaking and epic-changing book in terms of the way for women to be understood within American religious culture and the kind of pseudo-theocracy that often makes political decisions in the United States. She writes this in that book: the most stupendous system of organized robbery known has been that of the church toward woman, a robbery that has not only taken her self-respect, but all rights of person, the fruits of her own industry, her opportunities of education, the exercise of her judgment, her own conscience, her own will. So how did she feel about that, in other words? And you can see why she was a very radical freethinker for her time. She did not make up this terminology, but there is today something called the Matilda Effect that is named after her. Wikipedia defines that as a bias against acknowledging the achievements of those women scientists whose work is attributed to their male colleagues. This effect was first described by suffragist and abolitionist Matilda Joslyn Gage in her essay, Woman as Inventor. So today we do talk about the Matilda Effect of men being credited with scientific discoveries that are largely based on the work of women. Another trivia fact for you, just in terms of American culture, is her daughter Maud married L. Frank Baum, the writer of The Wizard of Oz. And as you probably know, The Wizard of Oz, the movie, is not the actual Wizard of Oz, the book, which was a radical view of economics for its time. So a very forward-thinking family there. Now, the question we're going to ask today is, how has your humanist commitments shaped your life? You see how Matilda went way outside of basic American ideas of her time because of her commitments toward free thinking. Also, before we begin our discussion, I do want to mention that we have our assembly at 10:30 a.m. Sunday. We will be celebrating the autumnal equinox, and my talk is called COVID, Climate Change, and Cycle of the Seasons, and it's about finding hope in our fairly difficult circumstances today. You can help out FUS by going to PayPal or firstunitarian.org/donate, and you can find out lots more about what we're doing on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and on Instagram. Thanks a lot for listening today, and now we're going to go to some discussion. In that discussion, the folks on our line, please feel free to leave your screen and microphone off if you don't want to join the discussion. But if you do, please join on in. And the question is, how have your humanist commitments shaped your life? Let me get my screen going here. There we go. And we're going to continue doing the recording today. And if you don't want to be on there, all you got to do is turn off your screen. And but if you're good with that, there we go. Good morning. I see. Bernadine, you don't have your hat on. Is it warmer in the North Woods today? All right, warming up. No frost overnight, maybe? That's good. That's good. Had anyone heard of Ms. Gage before? There is a humanist profile of her in the most recent American Humanist Association magazine, The Humanist. talks a little more than I did about her, and she's an absolutely fascinating person. And again, you know, there was a lot of discussion about why did the white suffragist women drop the idea of women of color and for getting the vote. Well, they did because they got rid of people like this. They got rid of the freethinkers because they were afraid of what they were saying about religion and race and those kinds of things, and they had to put them off to the side. So how have your humanist commitments shaped your life? Anybody want to take off with those ideas? Many of you are both Unitarian Universalist and humanist. I know it's always a little difficult to break the ice, but you know. Yes, Marcy. Yes.
Well, being a humanist and really looking at questions and committing myself to doing what I can in the here and now and today, I've kind of been concentrating on issues of justice. I've been working on environmental issues and other issues of justice. And I feel that this is something I need to be doing with my time and my energy, especially since I'm not working anymore because I'm retired. And anything I can do to further this, to join any causes that will help bring justice in our society is what I feel I need to be doing. I can't wait for everyone to think that this is the right thing. Sometimes you have to push it along a little bit.
Well, yeah, pushing it is one of the things that humanists tend to do, and with social justice issues. Do mention a little bit about the water project since you're talking.
I have been working in a group through the Sierra Club and other places that is against the rebuilding of Line 3, the Line 3 it's really an expansion project that's going to carry a bunch of dirty tar sands oil through Minnesota in an area, and a new area that has no pipelines, and it is very water intensive. It's going to be crossing over 200 bodies of water in this pipeline. And most of the scientists and people say this is not a good idea. You know, this is a terrible idea. There's treaty rights that will be violated. There's wild rice water beds that are very, very sensitive to all sorts of pollution and anything like that. And plus, you know, basically our society doesn't need all this oil. This oil is not for Minnesota. We've got plenty of oil pipelines and oil coming through here like mad. And this is an expansion, but they want to carry more oil and get that tar sands out of Alberta, Canada, which should be left in the ground, by the way. And so I've been working on that. And as a part of that, we're doing a relay for our water. And we had some indigenous native people, they took some water from the headwaters of the Mississippi. And that little pint bottle of water has been traveling around the state. It's in our West Metro area now. And it's going from group to group or person to group, whoever wants to take it. And FUS will have it on Saturday morning, September 26th at Lowry Park at 10 a.m. It'll be very short. You know, the water will just be transferred from the previous group to our group, and then it'll be biked. Thank you to Shelley Schreffler and Bob Adderholt. It'll be biked to just past the Stone Arch Bridge on its way to Boom Island. So I'll let somebody else talk now.
Well, I just wanted to highlight that one because it's something that's coming up not this Saturday, but next.
Yeah.
Also, you did mention native rights, and one of the things I just briefly mentioned with Ms. Gage was the fact that in the 1880s there was a big push to make natives into American citizens and remove any reference to their tribal connections. And that was, of course, a push to further disenfranchise the native peoples. And she fought that tooth and claw. And of course, and actually, you know, the radicals won that one. And the tribal nations are recognized now, even though they still don't have the same rights as a nation. We do refer to them as nations now, and they do have certain rights within the legal system that the more conservatives would have liked to have removed entirely. Bernadine, I think you were going to talk.
Well, thanks, Marcy, for that. And I just wanted to build on what you said about that was a wonderful example of how your humanist beliefs have informed your life. And I've been thinking about this week, and yesterday we heard David talk about the definition of humanism. It may have been from the author that we were discussing today, David, with the Six Commitments, that humanism is not so much about what we think, but how we act in the world.
Yeah.
And that has been a big takeaway for me from learning more about what's influenced humanist thought. It's this idea of human agency and responsibility. And so I guess personally, I was blessed, Unitarian blessed, to be born into, actually I was baptized Presbyterian, but my family joined FUS when I was in second grade. So I was pretty much raised as a Unitarian Universalist, UU. So I've had that heart-head idea with me as a child, and it has also propelled me into a lot of social justice work and really my career in philanthropy. But like you, Marcy, to me, humanism is really about accepting the responsibility that we as humans have to make the world better for ourselves and others.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's kind of amazing, really, with First Unitarian Society, how many people who are members are in some way involved on boards or, certainly members of nonprofits that are doing justice work. The Twin Cities are amazing with the number of nonprofits that are doing very specific kinds of social justice work. Often Unitarian, Universalists, and Humanists in the smaller towns are the only ones who are advocating for these more liberal kinds of values. But here we have a lot of nonprofits that do that and a lot of philanthropy going on. So, yeah, I think, again, it's one of those cliches that haunts us, is that that humanists are just thinkers. We're just in our head all the time. But the fact is, we don't know someone's a humanist unless they're out there doing something that is fairly radical for its time. Usually, getting out there and living the values out in the street. So, yeah. Anyone else? How are your humanist values reflected or shaping or have shaped your life, is the question of the day that we're looking at.
I find being a humanist makes it, how do I put it, easier to live in this incredibly diverse society. I've gone through periods of my life where I had a lot of anger about towards people of various religions, oh gosh, I really hate the Catholic Church or whatever. And now, being a humanist, I can accept that there are other people with other beliefs, and I have a better understanding that maybe why their background and their exposure has brought them to that. So I think that it's more accepting of it. It's not certainly not wanting to subtly persuade them that maybe humanism would be a better way to view the world, but it allows me to be more relaxed around people and I guess more accepting and more understanding of the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, talking about cliches, one of the cliches is that humanists are angry atheists. And the fact is we're not angry atheists. There are organizations for angry atheists, and that's fine. But discovering atheism and then discovering what to do, what your moral commitments are very different things. You can be an atheist and not have any particular, social justice aims or ethics or anything like that. But we humanists take it, and again, not everybody's an agnostic or an atheist. There are other forms of theistic humanism, but we believe, again, as Bernardine said, in human agency. And William R. Jones, one of the great humanist thinkers from the 20th century, African-American, argues that humanism is really about deciding that you can do something in the world and that a God is not going to do it. You've got to do it. So praying for for line 3 not to occur is just not in Marcy's bag of tricks, because we just don't think that that's really going to be all that helpful. We've got to pray with our feet, as Frederick Douglass said. I was a slave and I was praying, and I didn't escape slavery until I prayed with my feet, he said. So very humanist statement, right? But humanist commitments to, yeah, Ron.
Well, I have a sense that what the question is has been a kind of guidepost, not necessarily held up close, but one I keep an eye on. And the thing that one of the items that I want to mention about is in my professional, but not kind of educated for position as supervising a home for mentally ill adults who took medications. Mm-hmm. I will carry to my deathbed one of the autistic gentlemen who lived there saying to me one morning, "Don't demean me." Mm-hmm. 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 And it's that note to people who understand a lot that just because you understand more doesn't mean you're better.
Right.
And if you think and act like you do, people won't hear you.
Right, right, right.
So I am grateful to him switching character. And instead of being the student in our conversation, became the teacher.
Yep, yep.
And I'm grateful to myself to be able to hear and note that.
Right.
With no sense of being demeaned myself.
Right, right. Well, the inherent worth and dignity of every person is now the principle number 1 of Unitarian Universalism, and that comes out of humanism. That is a humanist idea. Christianity never would have come up with that, right? It is a humanist, secular idea of the value of every person just for being born. And it's a very radical idea, actually, and it's the cornerstone of Unitarian Universalism now, but it's the cornerstone because of the humanist insistence on that.
But it seems to be also part of many cultures. Don't criticize somebody unless you've walked a mile in their moccasins.
Yep. No.
It's
Yep.
the same thing.
Yep.
So to that point, David, say more about why you think this core principle of Unitarian Universalism about the inherent worth and dignity of every human life is not a Christian idea.
Yeah.
That feels like a very shocking thing to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at how the history of the idea, right, it does seem to come out of Christianity and the idea of a personal savior, that each of us have to face up to God at the end. So in that way, it has an individualistic Christian viewpoint, right? But Christian societies did not accept that as the cornerstone. As a matter of fact, and again, now we're talking Europe, right? Christendom. Look at the medieval and early modern ideas of those Christian nations, and it was God, king, right, and then everybody else. And the king was getting a message from God, right, to do what, and then so therefore the king could pretty well do anything that the king wished to do, underwritten by the facts of the theocracy. I've mentioned before that the United Kingdom, for example, still has a law that requires clergy from the Church of England to be part of the government structure. And that's a very Christian idea, that these voices of God will get to contribute to the conversation in government. In that time period, governments were completely fine with killing people who were in the way, right? And they simply had no inherent rights. It is a development of the Enlightenment, which again is a very problematic time period because it's also what gives us colonialism and racism and scientism and lots of ideas like that, bad ideas. But the idea of the inherent worth and dignity of each person comes out of an Enlightenment idea that we are all products of nature, not products of God, right? And so that's what moves the needle. Now, nowadays liberal democracies do at least pay lip service to the idea that each individual has inherent worth and dignity. Although, of course, we don't always act on that, but we do, in some ways, practice it, right? And that comes out of a secular idea, not a Christian idea. So it's Christianity fed into it with the personal God idea, but it comes into a more secular idea to really underline it. As yeah. So history of ideas are always interesting. There's no discussion among the Puritans, some of whom become Unitarians eventually in Massachusetts. There's no discussion of individual rights. The discussion is how you are going to conform to this Christian society, and if you don't, we will hang you from a tree. So, you will be taken care of there. John, yeah. We gotta get you on mute.
You'll be exiled to Rhode Island.
Yeah. Run them off to Rhode Island. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the trivia is that if you go to Boston Common today, some of the trees that still exist on Boston Common were used as hanging trees by the Puritans to put down the people who were not in agreement with them religiously. They had no concept of religious freedom whatsoever, except for themselves. Everybody else had to move or get hanged.
Quakers, for example.
Exactly. I mean, when I was talking yesterday about one of our humanist people, the Quakers also were very much into this idea of social justice and acting out. And of course, there is a statue of a Quaker near Boston Common who was hanged by the good Puritans of the day, right? So, yeah. Anthony, good to see you today.
Morning.
Hey.
I think that this is a really great question to ask. And I guess my approach is a bit different from the traditional answer. But I would say that I think that free thought for me has definitely led me in a gradual process of really discovering what does it mean to really recognize the humanity of others.
Right.
And the process of recognizing the humanity and the human experience, right, in this process has really allowed me to open myself up to recognizing that we're all in different paths in terms of how do we achieve human development and human flourishing, right? And so I wouldn't say that, for example, humanism has led me away from the curiosity of really trying to understand what does religion, spirituality, community, congregations, and so forth, what are their role in our societies, right? And really trying to wrestle with the role of theistic communities don't necessarily hold the monopoly of these components within our society. On the contrary, has been the process of human desire for building a larger community. And how do we then explore that? And I think that for me, humanism has really, on the contrary, like you mentioned at the beginning, right, led me on a different angry or really antagonistic path. It's been more of cultivating this seed of curiosity, right? And how am I engaging in dialogue with those that might think different from what I do? But based on your answer to Bernadine, is recognizing that I value you and I recognize you for who you are.
Right.
Without any other qualifier or any other descriptor.
Right, exactly. Well, and you mentioned, we have talked, I think, a couple weeks ago about Alex Ryrie, who's a British historian and Anglican, but he argues that contemporary Western society is secular because so many people can see that traditional religions don't lead to a more just society anymore, right? And so we get liberal religions accepting secular values, but it's not the other way around, right? We're on the forefront. So, Matilda Gage is going to be talking about Native rights from a perspective that Christianity is damaging Native rights, right? Not from a perspective of saying that they ought to be Christian and then we will like them and make them American citizens, right? That's not the way to get at the morality of the situation. We have to go at it from a different direction and remove religion from the context first off, right? We can come back to it, but yeah. Someone had their hand up.
Yeah.
I wanted to say something.
Yeah, Marlene. Yeah.
Well, I've learned that you have to define God if you're going to start talking about God, because I studied Hinduism at UTS, and in India, every community had their own God, and you can say, my God is the sunshine. And then so if people come and say, well, I don't believe in your God, you're saying you don't believe in sunshine, which gets you off on a tangent in a different way. Yeah. And I was thinking also about our support of programs, and so I had to think it through, but we give money to the Sierra Club, we give money to Doctors Without Borders, and we give money to Planned Parenthood. So that's kind of a way that we contribute.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and on Sunday, we're going to ask you to give some money to Masjid An-Nur. That's the mosque that's a partner with First Unitarian Society that delivers meals to shut-ins and families with young children. We're not going to question. We're not worried about the fact that they're an Islamic community, right? They're doing good for humanity. And we are a partner, and we're going to give them some cash on Sunday to continue their good work. And we're not going to be worried about any of the religious questions there. We're going to support them because they are doing human work for human beings right now in ways that we can't, as being a predominantly Anglo congregation. We're not going to be accepted into the Somali homes, but they are, and we're going to give them money to do that. So yeah, John, I saw your hand up.
I think that a secret we have is that if you have circles that let people in, if you're welcoming. We had one in Chicago, I think before you were in Chicago, where we had a adult discussion group where we every Sunday started where we ended the time before. Everyone had a chance to speak. You raise your hand, and not everyone was called on a second time, and we did it all in an hour with 40 people. And we always continue. I had discussions on the State Board of Education. David, having been in Texas, you know that there are 15 members and they're elected. Mm-hmm. And in 2006, there were no Democrats that ran in either of the two districts that cut through Austin. And I tried to get people, and eventually I led discussions, and I couldn't get, I knew some Democrats, but people came on their own, but we couldn't get Republicans we got some Republican speakers. It was at the public library, so we could hear them, but we didn't get them to our discussions. We get 30, 50 people to a discussion, and Democrats, I guess, and liberals would come and hash it out. And I saw a bumper sticker here in Texas, probably wasn't one of ours, that said, God said it, I believe it, and that settles it.
Yeah, well, yes. We humanists don't buy that, as don't liberal Christians either, of course. But the transcendental edge of Unitarianism is where the idea of what we now in theology we call continuous revelation. And they even have a phrase with the United Church of Christ nowadays. God is still speaking, and I mean because the early abolitionists had a problem because the Bible says slavery is fine, and the preachers of the South and unfortunately of the North as well a lot of the time said, look, Paul says slavery is a good idea, it's fine, and so what people at that time period had to say is, yes, but God is still talking. And Theodore Parker, a Unitarian minister, is going to say that it's continuous revelation through time, so that now we know that was something that Paul didn't know. But people committed to fundamentalism can't accept that argument. They just can't, and I'm sometimes amazed that people will say, "Well, yeah, but why doesn't racism go away?" Well, it doesn't go away in one way because it is a fundamentalist Christian idea that has to be there if you believe the Bible is inerrant. It just is. Paul says, "Don't worry, stay in your station." Be a good slave if you're a slave, if you were born that way, and God will come back any day and fix this problem. But you aren't in the business of fixing the problem, and that's it's shocking to the more liberal people, but that is the way fundamentalists must believe in order to make the whole thing work. That's part of the idea. Yeah. Humanist commitments that have shaped your life. Anyone else have a discussion here? It's this is an experiment. Anthony.
Yeah, I wanted to add on your comment about revelation being a process, right? I wanted to add that at least for humanism, I think that that's like a warning for us to really understand that knowledge is not necessarily absolute, particularly really taking into account cultural and ethnic difference, right? And how do we envision and embody our human experience? And I think that that's really important to be aware of, because sometimes humanism can fall in that understanding, that if it does not pass through our filters, right? And who gets to establish those filters and those ways of questioning and recognizing truth, then are we excluding others?
Right.
That don't necessarily have the same experience of humanism or free thought or just having critical thinking as part of their framework.
Right. And that's why we believe so much in critical thinking, because humanists have definitely fallen into traps of believing the science of their time being interpreted in a particular way. The most unfortunate of those examples are the misinterpretations of evolution that occurred in the early 20th century. People simply didn't understand the full implications of Darwinism. Darwin didn't actually know how old the Earth was, and so part of his argument was fuzzy at best and wrong at worst. So and yes, as Bernadine points out, that Kendall Gibbons, a former minister at First Unitarian Society, still a humanist UU minister, says that it's all about conversation. And again, if you're going to come in and oppose your white supremacist scientific ideas, you can do that. Just look at Africa, but what you create is horror, not human flourishing. So that's not a good idea in terms of how to do the world. And Justice Bovee, our great engineer here, is setting up a channel on YouTube called The Den of Conversation. And that's a phrase that I got from a philosopher, but the idea being that the den of conversation is what creates the best ideas. And you know, you can trace that through history. The Baghdad of the 700s was a fountain of brilliant ideas because Islam at that time in Baghdad was leading to people inviting new ideas in. And all of those ideas were coming in from North Africa. And suddenly Baghdad becomes a center of world culture. Boston was a center of American culture, not because people in Boston were smart, but because it was a port. And it was the most lively port of the 18th and 19th centuries. People were coming in from all over the world, including people coming in from the Caribbean. And as I mentioned yesterday, the Harlem Renaissance, it happens because you get all these African Americans coming in from all over the country into Harlem, but you also get the Afro-Caribbeans who are coming in, Spanish speakers, French speakers, people who have studied in France, Marxism in France. All of those ideas are what create the Harlem Renaissance, not just people in Harlem suddenly getting smart. That's not how it works. They weren't just reading books. That human beings were coming in. They were meeting at places like Ethelred, Brown's Unitarian Church in Harlem. They were talking with each other, and they were generating new ideas that were just so much smarter. It's truly amazing what human ideas in conversation can do. I mean, my favorite recent example is the Beatles. The Beatles are still, greatly loved all over the world for their music. Well, they didn't make that up, right? They got it from Elvis. They got it from black blues in the Mississippi Delta. They got it from ska in the Caribbean. They got it from native Brits. They got it from country music. They were taking all of these things that were in a matrix at the time. And also there were hundreds of groups in England trying to get to the US for the British invasion who never made it. And we never even heard of them, right? One-hit wonders, people who never got off the ground. But that's why the Beatles existed, is not because they were so good. It's because all these other bands were out there creating this great music, and they were listening, Why was Elvis big? It was because he had an absolutely photographic audio memory of black blues music, and then turned it into white music. That's how that happened. Conversation is the key to so much, and when we forget it, we forget at our own cost, unfortunately, right? So, yeah. Well, we probably ought to knock off. We've been talking for a while. It's great to hear from everybody, and be thinking if you would like to do this on Fridays from now on, and we will do that. So have a great day, and I'll see you at 10:30 Central Time on Sunday, talking about equinox and hope. So bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Keep up the humanist commitments. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.